Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us for an important and timely conversation about environmental and climate-related issues. We hope this afternoon that you will leave this session, and by the way, we hope it's the last of these virtual sessions. We hope you'll leave with a feeling of inspiration and perhaps ideas on how we can all deepen our commitment to protecting the environment and preparing for adapting to and fighting climate change through the example of three really inspirational leaders we have in Colorado who you're going to hear from today. My name is Peter Kirsch, and I'm a member of the Board of Trustees of the Denver Foundation and one of a small group of co-founders of the Environmental Affinity Group. The Environmental Affinity Group is a giving circle housed at the Denver Foundation. We were formed in about 2013 or so from a group of funders at the Denver Foundation who realized that the urban myth that Colorado has more conservation and environmental nonprofits than anywhere else in the world was probably true. And we recognized there was real value for funders, philanthropists, people interested in environmental and conservation and climate issues to get together and pool their thoughts and pool their wisdom and frankly pool their money. The Environmental Affinity Group has really three programs. One is a grant giving program. We make small grants to small organizations at a grassroots level, mostly in the Denver metropolitan area, but throughout the state. And we give out anywhere between $30,000 and $50,000 a year, and we've been doing that for a number of years. We also have probably the most enjoyable part of our program is our pitch night, or as I call it, speed dating. We get together once a year with a dozen or half dozen groups from around the state and ask them to pitch us on what they are doing. It's a wonderful way to learn about environmental and conservation organizations that we didn't previously know about. And then we host educational sessions like this to help our members and our friends learn more about what's going on in the environmental and conservation world. So I want to start out today thanking my fellow members of the Environmental Affinity Group, we're a couple dozen strong or so, for helping us put together the program today. And I want to welcome our friends from the Boulder Environmental Affinity Group who are on a similar mission, and we work together with them as much as possible. So with that introduction, I want to introduce you to three really inspirational thought leaders in the conservation and environmental space here in Colorado, who I think will give you a lot of really interesting perspectives, each from a very different perspective about what's going on and what can go on in the environmental and conservation community. We have Beatriz Soto, who is the director of the Poltehete program of Conservation Colorado. We have Cindy Chang, who's the executive director of Groundwork Denver, and Jim Balog, who's the founder and president of Earth Vision Institute. And rather than my talking about what they have done or are doing, I'm going to let each of them introduce themselves separately. With that, I'd like to also introduce Dace West, who is the facilitator for this afternoon's program, and she is the Chief Impact Officer at the Denver Foundation. Dace, do you want to take it from here?
Sure. Thank you, Peter, and welcome everyone. It's wonderful to have you with us today. We love these sessions. It's a really just enjoyable time to get to spend with our partners and folks who are interested in the issues that we feel so passionately about impacting the Denver metro community every day. So just a few logistics as we're getting started. This webinar is being recorded. You also have access to closed caption and subtitles. If you'd like to use closed captioning, just click the button on the bottom right-hand corner of your Zoom screen and select Show Subtitles, or you can also choose to show the full transcript. And that's an easy way to be able to take a look at what's being said in addition to listening to it. You all will be muted for the presentation, but please submit your questions in the Q&A. We're going to spend as much time as we can answering those questions after we have some conversation with our guest speakers. Just to add to Peter's context a little bit, I just wanted to note that working in the environment and climate space is new for the Denver Foundation as an institution. Last year, we launched a strategic framework that was based on the input of thousands and thousands of community members who talked to us about areas of greatest need and greatest opportunity in the Denver metro area, and where the Denver Foundation should weigh in. And something that emerged as a part of that conversation was that the Denver Foundation should start to work on environment and climate. That really gave us permission to catch up to some of the work our donors have been doing through the Environmental Affinity Group, the Climate Equity Fund, and some other environmental opportunities. We're now able to fund in this area through our community grants program, and to work in this area across the range of activities for the Denver Foundation. The other thing that the strategic framework emphasized was that we really want to be building partnerships, and in particular, learning partnerships between our generous donors who are entrusting us to partner with them around giving their resources out into the community, and the amazing organizations that are out doing the work in the community. And I think this is a great example of us being able to do just that. We have some really phenomenal speakers with us, and are so pleased to be partnering with the Environmental Affinity Group to sponsor this event. So with that, I'm going to ask each of our speakers to take about 30 seconds and just introduce yourself to the folks in the room. Let's go in the order of Beatriz, Cindy, and Jim. So Beatriz, can I turn it over to you?
Yes, thank you. Bienvenidos, welcome everybody. Thank you for having me. My name is Beatriz Soto. I use her, she, ella pronouns. And as Peter mentioned, I am the director for Protégete at Conservation Colorado. Protégete means protect yourself in Spanish, and this is a program Conservation Colorado started 7 years ago. The mission of Protégete is to elevate Latino-driven climate, air, land, water, and community priorities through leadership, development, education, organizing, advocacy, and elections for the benefit of Latinos and all people of Colorado. So it's a pleasure to be here today. Thank you.
Hi there, everybody. My name is Cindy Chang. I use she, her, hers pronouns. I'm the executive director of Groundwork Denver. Our office occupies the ancestral lands of the Arapaho, Ute, and Cheyenne nations. Groundwork Denver is celebrating our 20th anniversary this year. Our mission is to partner with youth and community to build a healthy, equitable, and sustainable environment. We do that through addressing environmental justice issues in the Metro Denver area. I want to first thank the Environmental Affinity Group for your past support of Groundwork Denver, and thank the Denver Foundation for this wonderful opportunity. I've been part of the Denver community for more than 12 years. So happy to be here and looking forward to this conversation.
Good afternoon. I'm James Balog. I'm an environmental photographer based in Boulder. I've been doing this work since 1980. My main area of focus when I'm not doing professional assignments for magazines or whatever, Time and Life and so on back in the day, and National Geographic later on. My area of interest is in the intersection between human nature and the rest of nature. This uneasy relationship we have, this conflict we have. I'm very, very interested in environmental impacts because I believe that we, the people, have an inalienable right, not just to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, but to clean air, clean water, and the security of a stable climate. So in my work, I try and combine art and science in order to illuminate these issues and help move the world to a better place.
Thanks to all three of you. This is going to be a great conversation. We're going to start off by watching a short clip from the film The Human Element.
Okay, guys. Are you guys ready to brush your teeth? Let's go. Come on. ¿Cómo se apaga esto? Okay. Okay. I need you to take your medicine, guys. Ready? Let's go. Slow. Slower, please. Slower. Good job. Ready? Good job.
And I need heels.
So you're going too fast, son. After we moved to this part of town, my older son, Ruben, started developing asthma. My daughter, Olivia, we had to start her on medications at the age of 1. And Leonardo was just kind of born into it. Okay, good job. Now go rinse your mouth really good, please. All 4 of us have asthma. So we're indoor people. We're not outdoor people. The pollution here in the neighborhood is pretty extreme. And, you know, we have the refinery and all of the pollution from the semis that pass through. Asthma is a normal thing in this part of town. One of the questions that a lot of people have asked is, why haven't you moved? Why don't you just move? Because moving takes money. Okay.
Bye.
Okay, be careful, son, please. When your children have asthma, you become, I don't know, paranoid. You're most definitely afraid of the air that you're breathing in. Because although you need it to survive, that same air is also killing you and your family. Vámonos. When Olivia and Leonardo became of age to go to school, I put them where there is extra help for children with asthma.
Hey, dude. Our students had trouble in typical schools because they would often miss 40, 80 days of school year just trying to get medical care. So they come to us, they have illnesses such as severe asthma. Some of the kids have other illnesses along with that, but the majority of our kids are struggling with air.
Okay, Emily.
Our nurses do a really good job of taking care of our kids, but if they are triggered by pollution, they can end up in the hospital and it's even life-threatening. So yeah, all the kids have their little boxes, and they've got their little pictures on them, and then the nurses train the kids to come in here and know what to do.
So how often would this child be coming in here during the school day?
4 times.
Really?
5 if they're
Wow.
sick, yeah.
They need meds 5 times a day during the school day. Has the incidence of attack on the kids gotten worse, or is it the same? Or, I mean, anecdotally, based on
Yes,
your experience,
exactly. And I've been a school nurse for a long time, and in fact, about 18 years, but there has been an increase in the amount of identified kids with asthma. Definitely.
Really?
That's absolutely true, yeah.
For most asthmatics, air pollution is a major trigger, and so you see a lot more asthma attacks in areas where there's a higher pollution level.
Thank you.
So Jim, in your film, as well as your book, you focus on air quality. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit more about why you decided to focus on air.
I think air is, in a lot of respects, it's the central element, the central material that is so crucial to so many of these environmental issues that surround us today. I think it's unfortunate in a sense that the climate change story focuses on climate, because it's the changing of air supply, of the very nature of air chemistry that's driven climate in return. Climate is an abstraction of changing weather conditions over long periods of time, but air is immediate. Air is what we live with. Air is the stuff that we take into our lungs 15 or 20 times every minute. And we depend on air even more than we depend on water and food. You die very quickly if you don't get air into you. And so as a photographer, I really struggled, frankly, to find a way to bring air alive, to make it visible, because obviously it's this invisible material. It's all around us. It's essential for us, but you can't see it unless it should be contaminated by pollution. And we know how to look at pollution out there on the horizon on a bad day in the wintertime. But in general, air seems almost irrelevant because it is so abstract and it is so invisible. So I wanted to bring it alive, and I think that so much of what we're dealing with in modern environmental change is connected with air. And so through wildfire, through filming and photographing wildfire, through filming and photographing with Yadira's family and at the school and at the children who were involved with the school, it gave us human stories, human ways to bring the air issue alive.
Thanks, Jim. Beatriz, I know that you all have focused some on air quality as well, as a much broader platform that includes all kinds of things. I wonder if you could just talk to us some about your environmental justice platform and how you approach your work to engage community.
Yeah, so I just wanted to share a little bit of data, and this is from the EPA. And Latinos in the United States, because of COVID, have been 2.5 times more likely than non-Latinos to contract COVID, 3 times more likely to be hospitalized, and 2 times more likely to die. And this is not a coincidence, right? We're tying a pandemic to the environmental injustices that are surrounding us. And what's really amazing is that it's 165% more likely that Latinos live in county with unhealthy levels of particulate and matter pollution, right? And 48% of the counties where Latinos live are more frequent to violate ozone standards as well. So what we're seeing is that this is by design, right? Certain communities are living with the brunt of pollution and the cumulative effects of pollution. And what we do at Protégete is, first of all, make sure that communities that are suffering the consequences of pollution are put at the forefront. So when we're trying to find solutions for clean air, these communities are prioritized because they are already suffering the consequences, and that we are empowering the communities to find solutions themselves, right? Something that we constantly talk about is that we don't want solutions that are charitable, but we want solutions that are self-empowering and making sure that the people that are suffering the consequences are coming up with the solutions that will work for their communities. And we have been working with areas like Commerce City, Weld County, also in the mountain region in Colorado, where, as Jim explained, there's a lot of consequences of wildfires, and making sure that we're monitoring and that we are phasing out pollution from our environment.
Cindy, you're also doing work with directly impacted communities. And I wonder if you could talk about what authentic community engagement means to Groundwork Denver, and paint us a picture of what it looks like on the ground.
Yeah, sure. Well, we can't do our work without community. The communities that we work with in Metro Denver are primarily communities of color, communities that have been historically under-resourced due to institutional and structural racist practices, such as redlining, that really burden these communities with environmental injustice, as Beatriz was talking about. So to be doing our work without community voice means that we would, as an organization, be perpetuating the cycle of outside people coming in and telling folks what's best for them. So for us, authentic community engagement really means to elevate those community voices in all aspects of our work, from program planning and implementation to even our organizational culture and our structure. That means our programs and the activities that we do look different in each neighborhood that we work in. So in Glenville, Elyria, Swansea, and in Commerce City, we are focused on air quality. We are focused on monitoring and education and action to protect folks from the effects of the air quality in that neighborhood. It may look different in other neighborhoods that have different issues, such as in Sheridan around water quality, to give a few examples. So, you know, it's a work in progress, obviously, but some ways that we have engaged community is by some tangible ways are creating positions within our organization that are specifically for elevating community residents, elevating our youth voices. We work with about 70 youth every year from those neighborhoods, really taking the time to listen and bringing that feedback back to the organization, continually improving our practices. We work in partnership with about more than 75 organizations and neighborhood groups every year, because we know we can't do the work alone. Everybody has expertise that they can bring to create some shared solutions.
Jim, you have a phrase in your movie, "Ingenuity moves us all forward." It strikes me that what we're talking about with these community-driven solutions is really all about ingenuity, and that there's a different way that you approach it through using art and the way that your work fits into this broader work. So talk about the role of ingenuity in your work and more globally, just what you see the role of ingenuity being in addressing climate issues.
Well, there's a lot of synonyms for that word ingenuity. Innovation is one that's applied a lot in the tech sector. But I think of it in a more general creative sense as being imaginative. I'm afraid that there's lots of imagination in this world, and many great ideas and philosophies and technologies and concepts have been cooked up. And it's vital that we humans keep generating all that imagination. I think where we have failed as an American society far too often is in implementing all the great ideas that we have. We really have the answers to the climate change problem. We know what to do. There have been white papers published and books published and reports published for 15 or 20 years with very, very, very good solutions to climate change at a local level, a regional level, an international level. We know what to do, but we've been dragging our feet because of various obstacles and impediments that we could get into if you want to, but I won't go there for right now. But a lot of those impediments are about politics and financial structures. So in any event, we have to keep leading with our imaginations. And I hope that through the art of all of this, it helps to stimulate imagination, helps to stimulate creative thinking, and helps to stimulate political and social action.
On the other side of imagination, there are these very stark logistical realities. I was really struck in the clip that we just watched about the statement, why don't you just move? Well, there's not money to move. And conversely, we also know that in our community, people are being displaced all the time. And so, Cindy, I know you focus some on this concept of green gentrification. I wonder if you could talk about what that means and how that fits into your work.
Sure. And to give folks, a working definition of green gentrification, it's a process in which focusing on greening a neighborhood can lead to increased property value, and therefore, pushing out the residents who, in my opinion, should have benefited from the greening the most. So you can imagine that, we're celebrating our 20th anniversary. Over 20 years in the Denver area, we've seen a lot of changes. Our office used to be in North Denver, now known as the Highlands, and one of our first projects was really to help reduce fuel waste and emissions from the tire shops in those neighborhoods, the yaterias. We worked in direct partnership with community leaders there to bring jobs to students at North High School, to plant trees and blocks with little tree canopy, to weatherize those houses. And now those residents can't afford those houses, and they have been forced to move. So we have really, learned a lot of lessons around how to be careful and intentional about our work, and to think through those unintentional consequences. I would have never imagined we would have been here where we are, 20 years ago. So now what we do is we really try to be intentional about our partnerships and the community-led solutions to the issues in the neighborhoods that they're in now. We work directly with housing advocacy organizations, and we also follow the lead of the community members who are intentional about staying in their communities and improving the health and well-being of their neighbors. So, it's for us, it's kind of an all-encompassing. We're not just focused on climate or air quality or environmental issues, but it's intertwined with housing, it's intertwined with immigration issues, all of these food access, all of these things that folks are really dealing with on a daily basis. We also follow residents where they go. That's one of our strategies. So over the last 20 years, we have shifted our work from, North Denver to far northeast Denver, Aurora, Commerce City, just to name a few places, and really supporting the communities of color in those areas.
Beatriz, I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the importance of connecting your personal lived experience to the work. I know that's something that's important to you personally, and it's something that is built into the work that you're doing. Can you talk a little bit about that and why that's so critical?
Yeah, so I just kind of also wanted to elevate that, we all need to bring our talents to this collective fight for our future to ensure that we have a stable and livable future, all of us, regardless of where we came from. And something that we work a lot with at Protégete is how do we elevate the lived experiences of communities and our lived experience to find solutions, and sometimes policy solutions, right? And environmental solutions that are very technical and wonky, but at the end of the day, they're about people, they're about humans, they're about, how they impact our daily lives. And I use my story a lot to help others connect with the environmental and the climate movement, right? Because how we've seen it traditionally framed is through this very white lens of being a recreationalist, being in the outdoors, right? And if you're a person that does not have the privilege and the benefit of that, what is your environmental story? What is your climate story? And the story that I always bring up particularly is that I am a climate migrant, right? I come from a place in North Mexico where there has been drought for over 30 years. And maybe a lot of you know people from Chihuahua, right? And in certain areas, and the migration patterns that we see, and like Cindy was saying, immigration is tied to climate, it is tied to environmental justice. And when I start to speak openly about my story, my migrant story, and how it is connected to water, how it is connected to the ability of a community to thrive without water, there is no future. And people start to relate their story and they start to dig a little deeper and say, I have a climate story, I have an environmental justice story. And these are not just issues, like James was saying, right, that it's about the environment, but at the end of the day, it's about people. And we want to make sure that every single person knows that they have talents and they have something to give to this movement, regardless if you're an agriculture worker, if you are an artist, if you work in policy, if your opportunity is to give and share your wealth with the movement, we all must bring our talents to it. And we want to make sure that disproportionately impacted communities know that their talent is needed and that there is talent there and that their story is important, and that together we will touch each other's hearts and we will create a more inclusive movement that can really create that change that I think we are all looking for.
Let me pick up on that idea of the lived experience. I like the fact that that came up in the question. Whether we know it or not, every single person on this call and every single person in Colorado has a lived experience of climate change. It's not necessarily even about those flickering wildfire flames up there. It's about the quality of the air that we've been breathing. We have had really crummy air here the past couple of summers. as a consequence of wildfire smoke, either generated locally or smoke blowing in from California, the Pacific Northwest, or even up in Canada in the Northwest Territories. This actually has been going on for years, but it's been really, really noticeable, particularly the last 2 summers. And every time you see that beautiful blue Colorado sky turning into that hazy white thing, and then of course, obviously, when it turns tan and black, you know you're breathing bad air, but it's that hazy white stuff that is all the particulate matter blowing in from the wildfire smoke. So that is all of our direct connection with climate change. It's real. You don't have to have a hurricane knocking your house down or a wildfire burning your house down, as it did in Marshall, to be connected with climate change. It's affecting your pulmonary health every summer and on into the fall.
Cindy, any thoughts that you'd like to add about lived experience and the importance of including that kind of conversation as a part of organizing?
Yeah, we talk a lot about how, and if anyone has kids and has seen Frozen, water has memory. We also talk about land has memory. Our lives have the memories of our ancestors in them. So thinking about the lived experience and bringing that to our work today is really tapping into that history and that memory of our lives and our land. And when we talk about lived experience and we talk about community expertise, that's where it really comes into focus. Is folks know what they want and what they deserve, and it doesn't. We can use data from science, and we can use information from researchers and folks and partnerships, but at the end of the day, people know what they need to support and protect their families and their communities. And the more that we can listen to that, tap into that expertise, and bring that to the forefront, the better we all will be off.
I wonder if any of you might touch on some of the challenges of engaging community. We've been talking about the importance of it and where it fits into the work, but it's not easy to do. So talk a little bit about what makes it hard and how you best facilitate it happening.
Happy to jump in. So something that we realize when we work with disproportionately impacted communities is that these communities are facing a lot of burdens overall. They're economic. A lot of our community members work 2 or 3 jobs. They don't have medical insurance, right, to deal with a lot of medical issues, so they have to deal with it on their own. And what ends up happening is that these communities are just, they don't have the time, even though they're directly impacted and they very much care and suffer the consequences of these issues. The larger societal issues that are impacting them are so many. It's not just environmental, right? It's so many other issues. It's housing, like Cindy said, right? It's how they transport to work, where they work. There's all these issues that, they don't only impact the environment, they impact our democracy, because these people can't necessarily engage in our civic and our democracy that is set up for all of us to be able to participate. Sometimes they don't have the opportunity to get educated on the issues that are impacting them. They're suffering the consequences, but there's not that additional time. Is such a precious resource. And when you don't have that, it doesn't allow you to advocate for yourself. So we really need to start breaking down so many additional barriers that communities face for them to be able to participate. So we come up with solutions like having meetings at times when people are not working. We work on weekends, so people can come when they have their time off. We provide childcare, interpretation, like all these additional services to allow community to participate. And these are us as organizations, right? Being very flexible. But once you come in to relationship with an agency that works 9 to 5 on weekdays, it makes the work really hard. So then this puts us in a place where we are also pushing agencies and commissions and other departments to be, you need to understand the reality of these communities and start to be more flexible to make sure that we can have a just democracy, we can have civic engagement, and people can come to the places that they can really start to modify their lives and create change that will uplift their families and help their future.
Yeah, any other comments on that? Yeah, Cindy?
Yeah, I agree with everything Beatriz has said. I think I would just add, one of the things that we try to do to support folks engaging in this work is really compensating them for their time and their expertise as community experts. So, we work with 70 youth in those communities, and we pay them for every hour of their time. I was economically privileged enough to take on unpaid internships to really build my network and to learn about issues, but that is not a reality for folks that we work with. So really thinking about what can we do to reduce those barriers that have been created over time that are kind of, a default in some circles, really questioning what is the impact of every decision that's being made like that.
Yeah. So Jim, we're I think starting the conversation about impediments that you mentioned earlier, right? These kinds of barriers for people's involvement is one of those impediments, but there are lots of others. I wonder if you might want to expand on your earlier thought about that question.
Oh boy, you uncorked the title right there.
It's okay. We've got time. We're good.
Let me just pull the zoom lens to a view up to 100,000 feet and then up to 200,000 feet. And the view from 100,000 feet is that we are surrounded by a history of burning fossil fuels. That goes back to approximately the year 1800. And there's just an enormous amount of physical infrastructure, financial infrastructure, and behavior that's connected with burning this stuff. And that's why we can't pivot quickly. We're surrounded by that history, for better or for worse. History can be a great strength if you have a good history and if you use it well, but history can really be a burden. Then let me take that camera view up maybe beyond 200,000 feet and up very, very high and look down. And what I see is that the human animal has known how to use flame and fire for a very, 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 very long time, back at least 300,000 years, maybe 4, 5, 6, 700,000 years. There's a lot of argument about that among the anthropologists, but the point is that it's in our wiring, it's in our neurons that we comprehend the idea of creating energy by creating flames. And so when we today of the climate movement are talking about, hey, let's stop creating energy from flames, and we want to harvest it directly from the spinning of the earth in a wind turbine, or harvest the energy straight from the sun in solar panels, that goes against all the history that's embedded in our Homo sapiens neurons and our instincts. So it becomes very, very, very hard to break out of these old patterns and habits unless we're getting smacked in the forehead all the time by events that are going on around us. And then we realize there's an emergency and we have to deal with it. And of course, we can see nature is talking back to us now. The rest of nature is talking back to human nature, saying, you've got to deal with these things. So I'm sorry, that's all very vague and philosophical and abstract. And my co-panelists are down in the ground actually doing things, but there's my philosophical reaction to a lot of these issues.
All right, let's build on that philosophy. Cindy, what are your thoughts about what things are getting in the way of us being able to make progress in this area?
I think it's, we're really required to come up with a very different type of solution and mechanisms than we have in the past. I don't think in the past we've really thought about bringing everybody to the table, understanding that solutions created in a silo don't benefit, they leave a lot of people out, and there are root society causes. And I love how James was like going to like the philosophical, and I think bringing some philosophical in terms of our human nature too, of excluding people, of finding solutions for them, of thinking certain groups are better than others. And historically, this is how we've functioned as human beings in a society. And we can no longer do that, because this has to be a holistic approach where everybody is brought to the table. Otherwise, if we don't bring more societies, even outside of the United States, right? The global South and the people that are a lot of times more in poverty, or if those people do not come along with us, we will not come up with solutions that will help all of us. And this is such a big problem that it requires society, and it requires, dealing with a lot of issues that we have not confronted before, or we haven't found real solutions. So I think this is where it becomes very challenging and sometimes paralyzing, but we can't allow that to stop us from keep trying to cross those bridges, to create those partnerships that are unexpected, because at the end of the day, this is something that we all have to figure out together, and it has to be this collective effort. Where, again, as I mentioned before, we all bring our unique talents, our culture, our language, our skills to the table to find solutions that at the end of the day will help all humanity and living forms on our planet.
Yeah, I love this. We're in a climate emergency, and when there's an emergency, you don't keep trying to do the same things over and over again, right? So we saw this with COVID. Like, this is a global issue. We all came together. We shut our world down in a way that we haven't done in 100 years, and we came up with a vaccine in a year or 18 months. So we are able to find solutions when we recognize that an issue is as important as it is to our entire global community. Just to kind of connect that with the work that we do on the ground, the other piece of that is that, we are all humans. We're working based on human relationships with each other, right? So a lot of our work is really just building trust, talking to people, listening, understanding what their needs and desires are. And it may not be my needs and desires. It might not be in the language of climate change, in the way that we have, known it to be. But folks are being impacted today with the decisions that we've made over the last decades. So how can we continue to bring those lessons forward? How can we have those conversations with our neighbors and friends and partners, and really make a change both on that human connection and on the global connection? More philosophy for you today.
I love it. It strikes me that some of what we're talking about here is emerging leadership, right? Leaders that are emerging from different communities, maybe youth leadership. I know, Cindy, that's something that Groundwork focuses on. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about, what do you see the facilitating conditions being for that leadership to emerge and to really help grow it, and kind of pull it out into the ether so that it can become part of this generative process that you're all describing?
I'm happy to go first. So we work with a lot of youth, and we hire our youth to work in natural resource conservation projects in their own neighborhood, in concert with them identifying what those solutions are. So it could be, you know, we have an alley that's always filled with trash. Let's go clean it up once a week. We have a place where we walk to school every day and there's no trail and it's unsafe for our little siblings. You know, I would love to learn how to camp. All of these kind of things. We bring these to our organization, and we provide the resources to you know, address the solutions that our youth bring to us. You know, when I think about supporting emerging leaders, I really think going back to that listening piece. You know, the youth are part of our community. They are our next generation, and they are leaders today also. And so we need to support them in the resources that they need to be able to elevate their voices. The other thing that we do, you know, I think we've our kind of society has talked a lot about the institutional discrimination that has happened in, let's say, hiring in any kind of workplace. So we're looking to focus our efforts on youth and adults also who have traditionally not had the door held open for them. So we're really looking out for those youth who may be leaders in their homes, in their churches, in their schools, and really elevating them because they have that kind of natural leadership in them, and to provide them with the resources for them to really bring their voice to what they care about is how we are supporting them.
Great.
Happy to go next. So something that Protégete has been working on is developing an environmental leadership academy. And what we're really looking to do is power map boards and commissions, elected offices, and making sure that we are training our community to be on these decision-making bodies so that lived experience is brought to the table when those decisions are made. In the past, we focus a lot on becoming organizers and advocates, but to your point, the power needs to be shared, right? And I can only imagine somebody like Odira was her name, James, in the film, being like on the air quality commission at the state level. Can you imagine having that voice in that room and bringing the reality of what it means to live in a polluted area in a decision-making body that holds polluters accountable? Those are the spaces that we need our communities to be sitting at. And that's what we have been focusing on, and then making sure that, you know, we're not just putting these people in these positions and then leaving them alone and not having all the resources in terms of education, the technical information that they need, because it's not easy to sit in these spaces when you're the first one in your whole generation, your whole family, your whole community that has ever been on a board, a commission, run for office. We had two amazing environmental justice leaders run for office in Commerce City. So we want to make sure that we are supporting those people that are willing to step up and say, I am going to be a leader in my community so I can make those changes, and make sure that organizations such as ours are backing them up and giving them all the resources that they need so they can thrive in these positions as well.
Jim, any thoughts about emergent leadership?
Not my department. My friends here are far more expert at this than I am.
Well, let me ask you this. Talk about some solutions that you see that are working. What gives you hope? What makes you excited?
Yeah, I'll be perfectly honest with you. My sense of hope waxes and wanes with the moon or something. I don't know. Well, certainly waxes and wanes with the political winds to some degree. we, of course, a year ago came out of a very, very dark period in terms of any of these kinds of issues. And now things are moving back in a better direction. But so I don't want to be Pollyanna-ish about this and say that I'm just, wonderfully, fantastically hopeful. But there are good things going on. In the film that you saw the excerpt from, in The Human Element, the whole last scene, or second to last scene, was about some entrepreneurs who were building a huge solar panel farm on a mountaintop in Kentucky that had been ripped apart by coal mining in past years. And these guys wanted to build a very substantial facility and feed solar power into the grid. Well, they got all twisted up in Kentucky and West Virginia politics. You can imagine that those politics are very, very heavily controlled by the coal mining industry, and indeed they were. And there were so many obstacles that these guys were basically shut down. We shot the scene in 2017. The film came out in 2018, and they were paralyzed and they couldn't move forward. But then I found out just a couple months ago that they are moving ahead with a 3 times larger project, a couple of counties away, still in Kentucky, and they're going to break ground on this new solar facility this spring. And the Toyota manufacturing plant in Kentucky, it's the largest Toyota manufacturing plant in the United States, has committed to taking all the power off that mountaintop and feeding it into their industrial operations. Of course, the electrons all get mixed up in the wires, but the point is that Toyota committed to being a market user of those electrons. And that's a very, very powerful thing for investors to know that somebody wants this stuff. So I take hope from things like that. And I'll tell you something else and I'll leave it at that. I gave a talk at the National Renewable Energy Lab in Golden a few years ago, a luncheon talk about what I do with art and science and looking at receding glaciers and wildfires and endangered wildlife and all the rest of it. And I had all these really bright, cutting edge, avant-garde, not exactly avant-garde, but cutting edge engineers in the utility industry sitting there in that room with me. And I said, I bet you guys are really depressed about the future because of how hard it is to move with the political obstructions in Congress. And I said, give me a show of hands. How many people are depressed? How many people are optimistic? And to my absolute shock, out of about 75 people in that room, about 70 of them raised their hands for being optimistic. And I said, what are you guys smoking? What's going on here? And they said, well, we here on this cutting edge of technology are very optimistic because the costs of renewable energy have gone down so fast, so far, and it's now competitive with all the old traditional fossil fuel sources in many parts of the country. So we're very, very optimistic that there is a realistic chance of changing the electrical generation system and the transportation system in the very near future. And we are seeing those changes play out right now. And that does make me optimistic as well.
Powerful story. Thank you, Jim. Beatriz and Cindy, what about you? What are you seeing that are some of the solutions that are working?
Well, I love the idea of hope, and I hope to hold on to that as long as I can. I think what does give me hope is, being a part of this movement within Metro Denver, community residents organizing for issues they care about, creating tangible solutions. We're all about tangible solutions. We say we're doers, not talkers. So I love working with a neighborhood group who's planning a tree planting, or working with community members who are focused on air quality monitoring, not only the monitoring, but understanding the data and sharing that data and why it's important with their neighbors. So really closing that loop on the information and knowledge. What I also find hope in is, you know, from the early part of when I was engaged with the environmental movement to now, we've really opened up the conversation to include racial justice and to really understand that environmental impacts to the environment are not equally shared with everyone. So therefore, we can find solutions to those issues that work for each community. I see a lot of joy in the movement. I see a lot of, like Jen, bringing art into the movement, lifting up Indigenous ways of healing, and bringing cultural practices into sharing the land and sharing food, and just really understanding that this is really a community effort, and therefore we bring our whole selves to the movement. And that is the part that gives me hope, is that you know, I just see a lot more inclusivity and voices at the table.
Yeah, so important. Beatriz, how about you?
Cindy and James said it so beautifully and wonderful. So I don't know if I have a lot more to add to it, but I guess what brings me hope is that this is so much more than just climate. It's our collective future. And for me, you know, finding equitable and just solutions is what really brings me hope. Making sure that we are not only gonna, you know, be able to figure this out as humanity, but we are going to be stronger. We're going to be better connected. We're going to be just such a better society at the end of this and as part of this. And that doesn't mean it's going to be easy. I'm just saying that the vision of that is what really brings me hope. Making sure that we're all gonna win, and it's just going to be such a better place for humans and for the other species we share the planet with, and that, you know, we can evolve and our conscious can evolve as well to be understanding of and accepting of differences, and making sure that when we're thinking about any change and impact we have, the ripple effects, and starting to think and operate differently as humanity in a way that is self-sustaining, it's regenerative, and it's long-term, and that we can finally get to that point.
Yeah, thank you.
I would like to propose that we Americans need to stop being so focused on the short term. One of the big reasons that the Europeans have done so much better at shifting their carbon pollution is because Europe, being a much older society and it's having societies, and sorry, I'm getting tangled up here in my own brain. They have cities that are full of history, and they're very conscious of history, or all my European friends, very, very aware that there's hundreds of years behind them. They think about the future in a much, much different way. We here in America are a very young society. And frankly, I don't think consumer materialism has been our best friend all the time, because consumer materialism keeps us very, very, very focused on the short term and on our own narcissistic, selfish interests. And somehow we have to think bigger and broader and more graciously and generously and altruistically about what we're doing today, because it affects all those people in the future. And those are children and grandchildren. And it goes a long, sorry, I'm getting choked up. It goes a long, long, long way into the future, that we're making decisions today that are going to affect people we can't even imagine, but we owe it to them.
I think you just gave the perfect answer to the first audience question. So I'll see if Cindy and Beatriz have anything to add to this. The question is, considering the long list of other issues that need to be addressed, why should those joining us today put climate change at the top of their immediate concerns? So we just heard about the eternal nature of this. Other thoughts on that question?
I always like to share that all roads lead to climate. So if you are passionate about art, if you are passionate about your garden and wildflowers, if you are passionate about education, reproductive justice, all these, whatever you love and care about is an imminent threat, right? So I know it's sometimes kind of hard to think that every single road leads to climate, but that is the reality. And as James framed it, it's our future, but it's also our present, and it's every single thing that we love about our lives and about our existence that is related to it. So this is, again, it's a collective effort that, we all hold a little bit of responsibility. And I think if we are all willing to hold a little bit of responsibility, it's a lot less burdensome than a few of us trying to figure it out. But anything we love is completely attached and connected to this big issue.
Yeah, and I love this question because it is something that we actually talk about a lot in Groundwork Denver. We work with community members like Beatriz was speaking to earlier, who have a lot of immediate needs, and should we be sharing our resources with those immediate needs? And I think to connect it back to climate is really just having a better understanding of how our present connects to the future. Not to get philosophical again, but just to know that our food systems are changing today because of the climate decisions that we've made in the past. Indigenous ways of producing food has to change now. And, that is a climate issue, and that is a climate issue that we're going to deal with today and in the future. There are so many other pieces of our lives that are addressed by climate, but also are addressed if we kind of focus on what moves us today. So, we are employing youth to pick up trash in their neighborhood. And we are developing leaders in their neighborhoods to focus on the climate and the environmental issues that they care about today and in the future. So it's all connected. And, as somebody who gives, both my time and my treasure to a lot of different issues that I care about, I can definitively say that climate is on the top of my priority, in addition to many other things that I care about, and they are all connected, both for me personally and in the community that I live in.
Here's a policy related question, which is, can you address how the legislature can change to better protect Colorado's citizenry when it comes to climate issues? Are there particular strategies and pieces of legislation that you're working on, or kind of globally areas that they touch?
Yeah, I'm happy to answer that. So for example, Conservation Colorado, every legislative session, we are working on different aspects to support, making sure that we are having equitable solutions for climate. For example, this year in the legislature, we are working on addressing drought, right? And making sure that we are finding solutions for our state to make sure that we have water into the future, and that we are also sharing water with the communities that so heavily depend on it, which is our food sources as well. We're working on air toxins and making sure that we are monitoring more particulates in the air, and that we're holding polluters accountable. Our governor put a pretty ambitious roadmap to make sure that we are moving towards net zero energy And as an organization, we are making sure that these are not just promises, but that we are actually putting teeth and legislation and accountability, that we're measuring, that we're actually getting to those milestones. So we work at a state level. We really try to support at a local level because obviously we all play a role in this. And then at a federal level as well, right? When we get federal funding like the ARPA money, hopefully we can pass the Build Back Better package, that as part of all of that, that the money that does come into Colorado, that we are allocating it to the right communities, that we are thinking about equity and justice and climate solutions and all those resources that are shared with us, that we're using them to actually help find solutions and not perpetuate or make the situation worse. And that we are, when we're thinking about infrastructure and all these different opportunities that we have in the federal money as well, that once it gets into the state, that it is towards solutions that are clean energy, that are helping our resilience in terms of understanding that our climate is changing and that those dollars are spent in the most effective and smart way possible with the least amount of consequences or a least amount of carbon footprint. Without getting into like the numbers and
that's right, House bill. Let's stick with this idea of, I'm thinking of it as kind of not preaching to the choir, right? There's, these unlikely alliances that are going to have to form for political will to make this happen. And that's true in broader society as well. So how do you think about ways to engage people from different parties, countries, philosophies? This comment says, whether we're talking about an immediate existential threat or a long-term issue, we're not all pulling in the same direction. And so how do we start to bridge those gaps?
So,
I know we all have thoughts.
Something that Protégete that we've been thinking about is, especially with COVID, a lot of Latino-led little groups that are nonprofits, that are informal groups, started to form or started to elevate themselves to help with the pandemic. So the infrastructure is there. So we've been really strategic about who are the parties and the groups that have traditionally not been part of the climate and the environmental justice conversation, and how are we elevating their leadership, continuing their education, and sharing our resources and our tools and our wealth with some of these smaller groups so they can start to engage. So what we are doing very purposefully is making sure that we are bringing more people to the table, at least at a state level, since that is really the territory. We do think of ourselves as global citizens, but we are also thinking about what can we do in Colorado to make sure that we are bringing and creating space for the people that have traditionally not been a part of this movement, and making sure that we are very intentional about that and not staying in our comfort zone and going outside of it to broaden that, and thinking about at a state level, what are the impacts that we can do, since we focus on the Latino community, and we have Latino communities in the Northwest, in the Southwest. We have them in the north part of Denver and Weld County. We have a lot of community members, a lot in the mountain region as well. So really thinking about how can we make sure we are serving all these communities, and that we are intentional about elevating their different climate priorities so they feel like they have a voice at the table, and we don't create the system that, one package has to fit all, but that everybody feels welcome, and that those resources and those tactics stay in those communities so they can continue to do this work on their own.
Great. Jim and Cindy, I'm going to ask you to weigh in on this. How do we reach unlikely partners and pull folks together across the philosophical divide?
Oof. Cindy, you're up, not me.
Oh man, it's a great question. I kind of go to the analogy of the relative that you don't see eye to eye with, but you sit around the holiday table with, and you get to know on a personal level. I personally think it comes down to that, and really understanding where people are coming from, bringing them to the table in a way that invites their background and their expertise, I think is kind of the first step. There's always going to be a couple steps backwards, and working through that trust. I just think about this podcast that I listened to recently, where this fishing, or this small community in Canada is made up of all these people who love fishing, and turns out that climate change is bringing issues to the water levels, to because of the forest fires, they're not able to have good fishing days there. And so I think about, how do I bring them to the table of, urban communities of color and the effects of climate that they're addressing. And I really think it is finding those shared pieces that we can all kind of connect with in our humanity. It's not tangible in a way that I'm saying it, but I think it really does come down to just listening and to being there for each other in their moments of need, and in their moments of just knowing each other.
All right, Jim, I'll give you a break if you want one.
No, it's okay. Because I had a pause, I was able to come up with an answer. One of the great joys of my profession over the past 40 years has been that I've had to enter so many alien environments with people who were not, of my background, and we're very, very, very different. And that's not just in North America, but all around the world. And the one thing I learned that's incredibly valuable to every single new bridging, human bridging problem you need to do, is to be polite and be nice and listen hard and be respectful. And if you smile a lot, you can go a long, long, long way. You can get access and engagement with anything you want to do if you're respectful and you're curious and you're kind to people. And that's not always easy to do. And I at the risk of overgeneralizing, I think that we of the left wing, and let's be clear, that's basically where we're all coming from today. We of the left wing are much more inclined to be polite and respectful of other folks than perhaps the hard right wing is of us. There's sort of a winner take all kind of mentality now, and there's a lot of animosity towards trying to find a middle ground. But I think that all we can do is keep trying to be respectful and polite. And let me give you one specific example that popped into my mind as I was thinking about this. In about 2019, I had occasion to screen the Human Element film in one case at a museum in Louisville, Kentucky, and then at a special screening in Lexington, Kentucky, right in the heart of the Kentucky coal mining area. And they mine a lot of coal in Kentucky, which is why Mitch McConnell is who he is. And it turned out that audience in Lexington was almost all people who were somehow connected to the coal mining industry. And the picture is playing up on the screen. And I was sitting in the back of the auditorium, and I'm thinking, oh my God, I have to go back up on that stage when this film is done and answer questions from the audience. They're going to throw tomatoes at me. This could be a very rough night. And those two guys who were doing the solar panel project went up onto the stage with me after the lights came up, and we got a standing ovation. And I was completely mystified. And I actually said to this audience of 300 people, I'm touched and I'm stunned that you're giving us this kind of reaction. Frankly, I thought you would see this as being kind of adversarial. And this man who was the head of a very, very large coal mining equipment company stood up in the audience with a microphone and said, "No, you were respectful to us. You told our story not to make us look like snarling idiots with flames coming out of our ears, but to look at the thing from a human perspective. And we appreciate that." So I guess that's kind of the answer, at least in the sector that I work in.
Yeah, thank you, Jim. So here's, I think, a lovely question. It reads, coming from the traditional environmental community, I, for one, really appreciate and am thankful for the relatively recent emergence of the environmental justice movement. It adds a lot of momentum to our efforts. What can those of us from the more traditional environmental community do to help the environmental justice effort?
I want to just invite us all to think about almost the same movement. And I think they've been happening at the same time. It just hasn't been as visual. A lot of Brown and Black and Indigenous communities, part of the civil rights movement, there was a lot of environmental aspects to it, yet those voices weren't necessarily elevated. So I think it's just become more visible to mainstream, the mainstream environmental movement. But this is a movement that has been, going on for a long time. I was actually in a webinar a couple of days ago with the creator of the term environmental justice, and he's an African-American man from, I believe, North Carolina. And he's been working on this for over 40 years, right? Yet those movement didn't have as much media attention. And I think part of this is the racial awakening that's happening in the United States. But I think we're at a moment where, all these efforts can grab more strength, and kind of what Cindy was saying is not only bringing in the environmental justice movement, but all the other justices that are so related to climate, right? And how do we together create the climate justice movement, right? Where all these elements are brought into finding solutions that address these multiple issues at the same time. But yeah, I think we're at such a great moment in time where we can really start to see that this is so much bigger, and there's been a lot happening over the years. And how do we help connect all those dots and make sure that we're not leaving anybody behind as we're crafting solutions?
Yeah, I was almost going to say the same thing around, really seeing this as a one big movement. I got into environmental work from the social justice movement, and really understanding that, we are part of the environment, and, when we lift one of us up, we all lift. I would say, what I have seen from the kind of traditional environmental organizations and the movement that I have been really jazzed about, and I hope that it continues beyond kind of the trend that we're seeing right now, is really looking internally and recognizing that the kind of traditional environmental organizations have been white-led, have been based on white dominant ways of thinking and working, and really kind of breaking down their own internal stuff to really be able to recognize that there are more voices out there. I think doing your own internal work is probably one of the best things that you can do, not only for the environmental movement, but for your own relationships and for kind of like our social cohesion. Really thinking about how that internal work and maybe your biases and your prejudices also affect the institutional structures that are there. So, I've seen a lot of our partners that are more traditionally in environmental organizations really trying to bring new ways of thinking, new structures into their organizations to be able to lift up those voices that have historically not been lifted up. So that's where I would start. I'm working on my own stuff. I invite everybody else to work on your own stuff too, and really just continue to chip away at recognizing that there are a lot of voices out there, and that we should all be at the same table in the same earth.
Thanks, Cindy. So I want to take. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I just want to say, as philanthropists and funders, and we all play a role, right? And it's really important to recognize that as funders, you all have such an opportunity to push organizations and the traditional environmental organizations to ask, how does your staff look? Who are the communities you serve? Who is in the positions of leadership within your organization? And we've seen a lot of progressive change in funders pushing this narrative and supporting communities, right? What are the metrics? What are the deliverables? Being more flexible and really pushing the narrative to make sure that we're more inclusive. So again, we all play a role in this, and funders can play such an important role to make sure that we're shifting and we're distributing the power and the resources where they really want to meet, where they really need to go.
Thanks, Beatriz. You took me right into the last question. So you've already got your answer in. I'm going to ask Jim and Cindy just to give just a quick minute or so on what you see the role of philanthropy in being and addressing climate change in Colorado.
Well, I'll jump in on that one. That's an easy one. It is crucial. It is absolutely critical to have financial fuel to push these causes and these projects ahead. These things don't happen just because we're breatharians and we wish on a star. You really need to have the resources to do any kind of a program, whether it's for me to go to Greenland to shoot another picture of a receding glacier, or something to happen down in down along Commerce City and disadvantaged folks there, across the entire spectrum. We need financial fuel, and all of you who are listening, who are funders, you make a very, very important contribution to facilitating these things. We've got a gigantic forest management problem here in Colorado, and that immediately ties into wildfire danger, and it ties into air quality issues. There's going to have to be a huge campaign to deal with the forest management, and philanthropy is going to have to play a role in that, because there's not enough public treasury to take care of it all. So anyway, whatever you can do is needed and appreciated.
Thanks, Jim. Cindy, last word.
Sure. I would just say, recognize that the impacts of the climate emergency are solutions to really focus on those communities that have been most impacted. Supporting communities, or supporting organizations that are led by people of color, that are led by people within the communities, is one of the most important things. I think going back to our topic of community expertise, and really elevating those voices as much as possible.
Perfect. Well, I'd like to thank all of our speakers. I know everybody's giving you a virtual hand. It was such a pleasure to have a conversation with you this afternoon. I'd also like to thank all the Environmental Affinity Group members, our partners in this endeavor, as well as all of our guests. And I wanted to mention that you'll be getting a follow-up email that will have something that we call ways to engage. It'll be things to read, things to think about, things to look at, things to do. So we'll look forward to sharing those and being in conversation with you about them. And I'm going to turn it over to Peter to close us out.
I wish in Zoom there was a way to do a standing ovation. Is there a way to do that? because certainly our three speakers this afternoon, thank you to Jim and Cindy and Beatrix. You really have given us enormous optimism. You know, I'm thinking about what Jim said a couple minutes ago about his optimism or his hope waxing and waning. And I think in the last 90 minutes, at least for me, you've given us real reason for our hope to wax. The kind of work you're doing, the kind of work you're describing is really what in another context would be called actionable intelligence. I mean, I came away with a lot of really good notes of what we should be doing. We, meaning the philanthropic community, those who are interested in environmental and conservation causes, and very specifically the Environmental Affinity Group. So in closing, I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't both thank all the EAG members who helped us put on this program, and the Denver Foundation staff, especially Daley Johnson and Stephanie Williams, who've made this look simple. It wasn't, and they made us look good. We aren't. But in closing, there are lots of different ways that you can engage with the Environmental Affinity Group. We'll put some information in the chat about how to join, participate, call any of the members of the EAG. We're very happy to talk to anybody about our program and about what Denver Foundation is doing in the environmental, climate, and conservation field. So thank you very much, and enjoy the rest of your afternoon and your weekend on this beautiful day. Thank you.